Hey guys, how's it going? This is Dr. India White. I am the visionary author of the Equity Counts book collaboration. I am also a co-author with Big Ideas Learning, a K-12 math publishing textbook company that is doing some fabulous work, and a co-author with National Geographic's Engage Learning. I am so thankful to be in this space. So much has taken place. I have had the honor of working with leaders all over the nation, including leaders like yourselves. And I want us to get right into this book collaboration so that we can learn and debrief. Now, I hope that you've had time to look into the material so that you can definitely have some type of frame of reference as we're going through the curriculum. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to begin to share my screen, and I will present to you the slides that we will need to go through as we're working through this together. So now I'm sharing my screen as I am getting ready to present this to you. Just a little bit about myself. I had a background in mathematics where I majored in math at the University of Florida, went on to obtain my master's in educational leadership and my doctorate also from the University of Florida in educational leadership and administration. Afterwards, I was able to not only teach in the classroom for about 7 to 10 years. I did some leading as an administrator for 3 years in Hillsborough County schools, public high schools down south. And then I was able to do some math coaching at a turnaround school where we had some wonderful results. And now for the last few years, I have had the honor of working directly with math teachers, training, giving presentations on equity and other topics at hand that are definitely helping to close the achievement gap. Now, the reason why I came up with this book collaboration idea was because as I was in the market, I heard from so many different educators the frustration of, but we don't know how to really implement equitable practices. And some of them were like, well, what is equity? Can we even talk about equity? Will we, get in trouble? Will there be some type of reprimand if we even go there? So I decided to join many of my colleagues, as you see pictured here, to do this great work for all of you. So some of my colleagues worked at the Department of Education, others work in the House of Legislation, others with district office representatives. We have some that were principals that are now leading their district in equity tasks as well. We've also had math coaches and community leaders that have all joined, and Dr. Clyburn, who, unfortunately is no longer with us, but he was an associate dean, a dean of universities for several years, helping first generation students obtain their doctorate degrees. So from all of those different pockets, we are all speaking as experts in these fields to help assist you when you're trying to implement equity. I will do everything that I can to walk through the various chapters and what each expert is saying. Now, if you're wanting to follow up with us later, we will be more than glad to come and meet with you at your school, whether for a workshop, professional development, or another follow-up Zoom. Just make sure that you keep us posted as to how you would like us to service you. And you'll see that, I have the banner streaming down there so that you can get a hold of us. Now, I'm going to add this to our PowerPoint because I want you to be able to see that this is the Equity Counts book collaboration. It's myself, Dr. Dre Graham, Dr. Adrian Anthony, Dr. Alyssa Foss, Dr. Krishana Kudesi, and then, of course, Dr. Kunini and Dr. Clyburn, who is no longer with us, who have all contributed to this. Now, a little bit about me. Yes, I'm a 3-time graduate from the University of Florida. I was a former math teacher, grades 6 through 12 public school. I was a former math coach, grades 6 through 12 in public schools, a former high school administrator in Hillsborough County, as mentioned before. Also, I am honored to be the mother of 2 published authors in grade school. They're both middle schoolers. So yes, my hands are full. And yes, I love playing saxophone, and I cannot sew, even though I should. I mean, I took sewing class. I might be able to sew a pillow. That's about it. So that's a little bit about me. And I want to now start out with the book. If you have the book, you can go ahead and start looking. So I'm going to start on about page 25, where I talk about how equity influences instruction. But, before we really dive into this, the definition of equity, what is equity? Well, research talks about equity in NCTM, the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics. They said that all students should have access to resources and accommodations as needed. And then, of course, how does equity then influence instruction? For one, equity, it's not just a racial lens. We have to understand equity is the approach that you take to make learning to make learning a process for all students so that it doesn't hinder students based on their backgrounds, based on physical, emotional, social, or linguistic barriers that might exist in society or in the classroom. So your whole task here when you're trying to implement equity is to remove these barriers, physical, social, emotional barriers that would exist. Does your student have a disability? Do they need a ramp to get up to your classroom? Is the student deaf and hard of hearing? Do they need a translator? Do they need, if they're, a linguistic student, English learner, do they need a translator? Do they need supports like Microsoft Translate or whatnot to help them navigate through the content in your class? What does your student need to feel that they can thrive in your class without barriers? That is what equity is all about. So, how do you then dismantle wrongful practices and establish equity? First things first, why is this a big deal? Well, we've seen the National Report Card and other data has shown that if we continue education in the way that we have always done it, it's going to take us over 200 years to close the achievement gap. Knowing these numbers and knowing this truth, it is imperative that we do all that we can as leaders to close the achievement gap. We have to strive for an all-inclusive environment. You look at page 29, I talk about how we have to work through biases and put differences aside when scaffolding learners through academic success. I found in my research at the University of Florida when I was studying first-generation students and, what would help students to persist and how to make, classroom environment and the learning process more equitable. I found from Nora and Chris, they spoke in particular about African American males in their study. And they found that African American males were better connected to teachers who they felt were like mentors to them. So sometimes we have to stop and pause and say, how can I be a mentor to that student that might be from a different culture than myself? How can I be a mentor to a student that might be underserved? How may I be a mentor to a student that is going through a hard time? This is imperative because once these students, in particular African Americans, felt as if they had a mentor, it showed that they had a safe place with these leaders. And it helped them to take a risk, develop metacognition, higher order thinking, and academic achievement as a result. I want you to take a moment now and just reflect on your own practice and where you are, whether you can collaborate with those that are watching, or if you can just do this, just take a moment and think about what can you do in your school environment today to establish mentors throughout your school or throughout your district for students. As you're thinking, I'll share an idea with you. So we decided to put together in one of the schools that I was a part of, one of the Title I schools, we decided to get the students that were on edge of being at risk or students that just weren't performing at a level of proficiency. Sometimes they call these students bubble students. We also looked at students that had a higher disciplinary record than other students on our campus. This was the administration team and we decided to go through this list of students. And then we sent out an email to teachers and we asked all teachers to contribute to mentoring at least 1 to 2 students, during their lunch or during, before school, or finding a time with that student, maybe during a planning. And I know sometimes, you have to look at, contractual situations with teachers to make sure that that can not be a violation of, any teacher contracts and their time that's allotted to them. But long story short, we had a great turnout of teachers who said, you know what, I'm willing to, mentor this student. I'm willing to spend time with the student. I'm willing to, just check on the student and hold them accountable. And as a result, we were able to really see an increase in student success, and also a decrease in behavioral issues, a decrease in tardies, a decrease in emotional setbacks for students. And it really was a great success. So as you think on that, I want you to just kind of keep that idea in mind and see, how can I meet with my team, whether it's a team of teachers or team of leaders, and see how can we implement some things throughout the year. And yes, we did this. When did we implement this? We implemented it towards like say we had 4 quarters. So like towards the second quarter, and then we would follow up at the end of the third quarter. And then of course, at the beginning of like fourth quarter, we would really, start all in approach, an all-in approach, because we knew that students were getting ready to graduate, students were getting ready to transition to the next grade, and they were taking those standardized tests. So we really had to make sure that we came in strong and helped our students along the way. So I'm now getting ready to transition to the next part of the presentation. So there are some silent struggles in education. So there are microaggressions. I talk about this in page 33, where basically it's a silent struggle of kind of being undermined, by an authority figure or someone that, unfortunately, most of the times it's students of color that definitely do endure these things. There's also various limitations, including educational policies and unspoken biases that can hinder the work moving forward as a whole. So our goal is, how can we overcome these struggles together and help students achieve? Why is this imperative? Because yes, unfortunately, there is a school to prison pipeline. And how can we prevent this, in particular for students of color? If you look at page 35, I really go into that in depth in the book. So take a moment and look at, page 35, and you'll see I talk about how students of color are more likely to be subjected to the school to prison pipeline, because there are various perspectives that are held by leaders that could really hinder the students. So in order to go about this effectively, we have to connect the students of color and break down barriers and use empathy and compassion. I want to also add something here. We need to start implementing restorative practices in the classroom and in discipline. Now, I remember when I first became an administrator, I was proud to be an assistant principal. There was just this sense of power, this sense of, I've arrived, I've done it. And when I was in that state, I would say there was a little bit of an ego there of, well, I'm the AP now. So I had some swag. And I tell you this because I know that many of you might feel some of that every once in a while. But what happened to me was, unfortunately, that swag kind of took over. And when students should have just gotten, when they were sent to my office and they should have just gotten a simple warning, I was going all the way with, okay, level 1 suspension, level 2 suspension. Okay, the code of conduct says this, to where I suspended so well that I brought up the school. I was starting to bring up the school suspensions. And unfortunately, I was starting to get the rap of, I was like the first discipline for students. So I would, write them that day of ISS for tardies or for skipping. And it dawned on me, is that why I wanted to be promoted to principal? If so, maybe I need to reconsider. Because really, am I helping students doing this? I'll never forget a time a student begged me. And he was like, Miss, please don't call my dad. And I was like, no, I have to call him. You skipped class. And therefore, it's a day ISS. I've got to. And his dad was like, a well-known prominent attorney. And it just did not go well for that student. And I saw the traumatic effect on that student psychologically and emotionally when I would see them in the hallway moving forward. And unfortunately, it did put a barrier up in my relationship with that student. And it made me just start to kind of do a double take as to, before I honor this, referral and just give suspension, what could I do to restore that child to the way of work and the way of learning and the flow of instruction and the flow of behaving in a conducive environment on campus? So I had to challenge myself and say, do we really need to write all of those disciplinary reports and give every single student some type of infraction? Or can I call a teacher on some of these and say, hey, listen, I know you said that, student A did this and you saw them skipping. Is there any way that we can maybe mediate with the student and not have it go against their disciplinary report? And so I share this with you because, the thing that really hurt me one time, or it kind of got to me, there was a young girl who, unfortunately, there was a very strict dress code policy at this campus that I was at. Well, guess what? She was expelled from school for dress code. Now, when you think about it, is that fair? But listen, some of you might say, but, she knew better, right? She knew what she should have been doing. But however, now she is out there on the streets fulfilling statistical, data, unfortunately, in a bad way, being a stereotype of not being able to finish school, not being able to obtain a degree because of dress code. She was an AB student. And then unfortunately, it started to bring her grades down because she was never in school. And every time she had an infraction, and this is my pet peeve. So because of all of the infractions that added up, that if she came in with the dress code, because she had like maybe 4 infractions before, that dress code infraction then became like 3 days OSS. Really? So now she's missing 3 full days out of school because of the way she is dressed. The young girl told me, she said, Miss, but they don't understand. And she's crying. She's like, what they don't understand is I'm doing my best. She tells me, my mom doesn't shop for me. My mom doesn't buy my clothes. I have to get everything myself, and I have to work on the side, and I'm doing everything I can, miss. And now, I'm being expelled from school. And I thought about it. How is that helping children? Should we have dress code? Listen, that is a whole different elephant that would take a whole nother presentation here. I'll say this. Yes, the districts, they do have their set of rules and regulations and policies. Dress code is one of those things that some districts do when they're trying to really, I would say, control, for lack of words, the learning environment so that students can, have higher expectations in the way that they're supposed to appear. However, the gray area here is how much should you suspend a student on dress code? When can you say, you know what? If the suspensions aren't working, maybe we need a parent meeting. Or how about this? We used to do this. So if we knew that students had dress code, we had uniforms, and we would allow those students a chance of mercy. And we'd say, okay, I know you don't have the right outfit. That's okay. We're going to allow you to wear these shorts or these pants or these skirts or whatever, until the end of the day or whatever, and keep them if you need to. But we did that because we were watching out for our students and wanted to keep them in class, and we didn't want them suspended. And it worked. Our numbers went down drastically. It was a really good feeling, that we had some of the lower numbers in the districts of suspensions. And so I say that because, we just have to be very mindful when we are trying to implement various practices, that we also remember restorative justice practices. When a student is in a fight, does it really take 10 days out of school to discipline that child, or 5 days? We had so many fights in my district, right? In one of my districts, that we could no longer write. There was a policy that came from the district down, and it said you can no longer suspend a child for 10 days for a all-out fist brawling fight. The most you could suspend a child was for 5 days. And I'm going to tell you, that was one of the best decisions that was ever made, because the numbers went down drastically of suspensions. Students had hope again. I mean, think about it. Oh, another thing I want to tell you is this. Studies have shown that when you suspend a child once, okay, their chances of graduation goes down to about 67%, because they've had this psychological effect that has affected them negatively. And now they're not seeing themselves as that rising scholar. And now they feel like the school is against them. They feel like the authorities are against them. And now they're battling this. And now they're battling a negative self-efficacy, right? Unfortunately. And then now they start making decisions where it's almost like they're playing this cop chase game. You know, the authorities or the assistant principals are now the cop and I'm the bad guy. And this can be any student. This does not have to be of any particular demographic. We have to be mindful of that before we write that referral, before we process those 4 referrals. I had a situation where an administrator processed, they waited till about, I would say about a week of different disciplinary reports to process about 3 referrals on a student to suspend that child for 4 days, OSS in middle school. Why? Just for the fun of it. But then you have to think of it. If we are in a leadership position and we are suspending children, and then we go home at night and we lay our head on our pillows, how do you think we're going to feel if all we are doing is suspending students and not trying to restore students? The ball really is in your hand, principal or assistant principal. A teacher, listen, teachers, yes, they do have the right to say, okay, this student has been disrespectful, they cursed or whatnot. We had a policy where we had so much of that, so many of those infractions, that we could not suspend a student or discipline students for cursing. So we would tell that student, we would tell the teacher, you have to follow particular protocols, right, in order to really have us follow through. For instance, teachers, if you allow them to get away with it, they'll write a referral and then they kind of will have a high expectation of the administrator. You better write them up and you better suspend them or else. But if the teacher did not call home first, if the teacher did not try to mediate, if the teacher did not refer to guidance to see what was going on or refer the student to school psychologist or to see what other resources they had to kind of help that child with, behavior management issues, then there is a breach in the process or the procedures that they were supposed to do before issuing a referral. Administrators and principals, it is imperative that at the beginning of the school year, you have some type, or before school, some type of breakdown about the student code of conduct and your expectations of teachers of, okay, yes, here's the code for, the disciplinary database platform. And yes, this is how you write a referral. But listen, that's not our expectation. Like, our expectation is not for you to become the referral queen or king of the year. Our expectation is for you to use that as a last resort, not because you're frustrated because the student is cursing you out, the student won't sit down, or the student said something disrespectful to you, and now you want that student suspended for 2 days because you just can't handle them. That is not the purpose of a referral. Okay, we have to train teachers to take a moment, take a breather before it turns into a school to prison pipeline situation, or unfortunately they turn into that teacher that everybody knows, that teacher that all they do is write referrals and they've lost all power. Listen, when a referral comes to the administrator's desk, the teacher is saying, I have lost all control in this situation. This has been so overwhelming that I need administrators to now take over this entire situation. So if the situation is not one of complete threat of life, some type of danger to, the school or whatnot, then maybe administrators need to have a conversation with the teacher and say, hey, tell me what is going on. And then start asking the teacher some questions about, okay, tell me about your classroom management. Tell me about your relationship with your students. Do you get along with that child? What do you know about them? How about the family? How about the community? Have you reached out? Why is the wall up? Why is this always an incident? What's going on? talk with these teachers, refer them to Harry Wong's first 100 days of school, refer them to seasoned veteran teachers on campus that have phenomenal relationships with students, and give them a teacher mentor of some sort. Or even if you check in with them, and don't check in with them as like a gotcha situation, but check in with them to say, hey, how's it going? I just wanted to make sure that you're all right. And, I see that you're doing great. You're building relationships with students. I'm hearing great things. Keep me posted. And just try to remind teachers that the true power is in relationship building, not in their ability to write a referral. So with that said, let's continue to move forward. At the end of this, I spoke to you guys about definitely using empathy and compassion when connecting with students. Now, the late Dr. Clyburn, a little bit about Dr. Clyburn. So Dr. Clyburn was the first African-American who attended Sarasota High School in Sarasota, Florida. He, his junior year of high school, junior or senior year, the tension was very rough, to the point that other students brought a gun on campus and were shooting at him in the hall, trying to kill him, because he was literally like an integration project for the city to see if integration would work during some very sticky times. As a result, he did obtain his doctorate degree and went on to meet with various leaders, including Colin Powell and other amazing political leaders. And he has really made a stamp on education. He was an advocate. He was a civil rights advocate and so much more. And I had the honor of being mentored by Dr. Clyburn. He taught me so much about just different generations and how we've continued to evolve. He had a very blended, mixed family. His wife was of European descent. He has children that are of various descents. He's got Hispanic relatives. He's got relatives from the Philippines, and just a beautiful, beautiful family. He lived equity, and so it's an honor that we get to learn from him. So with that said, let's talk about what Dr. Clyburn has said. He mentioned the concept of equity is to give everyone in a situation the specific tools that they need to be successful. On page 59, if you look through that, you'll see that. And he says that it's imperative to embrace rather than to shy away from unique backgrounds. He always spoke about how people nowadays are living in silos. They're living in their own zones because they're afraid to have a conversation. There's so much fear and intimidation, and people don't know how to break down those walls. So he talks about embracing these uniqueness, these unique backgrounds versus shying away from them. And then on page 61, he talks about diversity, how it's the presence of differences that may include race, gender, religion, nationality, socio-emotional or socioeconomic status, language, disability, age, religion, and even political perspectives. He spoke about how equity is the process of fairness. Okay, he spoke about how when equity is taking place, it promotes justice and impartiality. So I want you to now take a moment and just think about, how can you take the concept of equity to give people on your campus, students and teachers, the tools that they need to be successful? What areas would you need to focus on? Do you need to focus on race, or do you need to focus more on linguistics, like language, or is it a political situation, or is it socioeconomic status? Like, what is it for your campus? Because every single campus, every single classroom has a different equitable issue. So take a moment to think about that. You might want to write it down. You might want to put it in the chat if that's a feature for you. And as you're thinking about that, be realistic. What systems have you put in place to do this? Do you need to maybe send out parent letters? Do you need to send out different like phone messages or whatnot to parents in the community, like letting them know, hey, this is what we're doing. This is what, we have in mind, what we have in common. What are you doing to kind of implement these processes the process of fairness for equity on your campus? So we're going to continue moving forward. Now we're talking about guiding principles. He spoke about the National Association of Secondary School Principals, and He spoke about how it condemns racial violence and structural racism, and it advocates for anti-racist strategies to lift up students of color and to construct a better school society. Further, it adopted position statements on culturally responsive schools, educator diversity, poverty, and its impact on students, law enforcement in schools that promotes student equity, and to help students to reach their full potential. Now, here, I thought that was very imperative, where it talks about culturally responsive schools. So, like, really making a heavy effort to have culturally responsive teaching within the school structure. And then, of course, educator diversity. Studies are starting to show that when there is representation, diverse representation of educators and leaders, that really contributes to an increase and a significant increase in the impact of student achievement, on learners of, in particular, of diverse descent. So, also, let's keep moving forward here. Equity is a commitment to social justice, civil rights, and human connectedness. If you look at page 64, that's what Dr. Clyburn is talking about there. Dr. Clyburn also mentioned here the professional standards of educational leaders, how it's effective leaders who strive for equity of educational opportunity and culturally responsive practices, how they promote each student's academic success and well-being. Take a moment and just kind of just glean all that, take that in, and just consider how this is a nationwide work. And there's a reason why these different standards and principles and things have been put out, because our nation, we are now, in the 21st century, we are moving ahead, we are thriving, as a human race, we are thriving, and we are doing all that we can as leaders to continue to keep the work that has taken place in education to move forward. We have to continue to fight intentionally to keep everyone connected and working together. And sometimes you have to do that and do it afraid. But together, we are better together and we are stronger together. So now look at page 66 through 67. Take a moment and, find pages 66 through 67 in your book. Dr. Clyburn left us with some recommendations for policymakers. He said that, he thinks that we should fully fund Title I ESEA Act, okay, which we know there's, federal funding and it's according to student performance. And then he said that we should fulfill Congress's obligation to fully fund the IDEA Act. He spoke about fully funding Title II of ESEA Act, strengthening school leader preparation programs, and professional development opportunities. Now, here, I thought this was very interesting because I do find that, yes, there are professional development programs, but how many of them really tie into the issues around, student achievement, inclusion, and equitable practices for teachers? And I think that that's something that district leaders need to definitely consider when putting together various programs for their teachers and their leaders, so that the student and the schools and districts can continue to move in a forward way. They need to consider what type of professional development are they offering, and do they have they diversified it enough to reach all of the different leaders and educators alike. Also, Dr. Clyburn spoke about offering incentives for states to conduct racial equity audits, developing a framework for racial equity lens to educational policies and programs. So, and I think he was saying that just because of the importance of having representation and to continue to hold everyone accountable, so that we can all serve all learners. He also spoke about providing adequate funding for the U.S. Department of Education civil rights to promote educational excellence and equal access. So those are some recommendations that he left with us. And so now I'm going to talk a little bit about Dr. Dre Graham, who is a wonderful leader, worked at the Department of Education, and now he is doing some wonderful things in Alachua County schools as an equity director and so much more. He has obtained 2 doctorate degrees and has another one brewing. And he is a perfect example of how equitable practices can really help someone thrive. And so he spoke a little bit about how equity is not equality. He speaks about how equality, it's a one size fits all approach. So I give all the kids a book. I give all the kids a textbook or pencils and paper. They'll be fine. They need to just figure it out. But he's saying that that's not enough. He says that equity is when it's individualized and intentional. Dr. Dre speaks about equity and how it's providing individuals with supports and scaffolding required to pursue the best version of themselves, tailored to the unique and individual needs. He speaks about how equity accounts for factors from the past, so generational injustices that have resulted in achievement and opportunity disparities for various populations. Dr. Dre continues and he says that equity is not just for remediation, but also enrichment. And so, as you can see here, it's an intentional approach to tailor to the needs, the unique and individual needs of students. And it is not a one size fits all approach. So I want you to think about, maybe your personal situation, as a leader, a teacher, coach, district leader, or whatnot. And what efforts have you been able to successfully make in making sure that your practices have been equitable, serving the unique individualized needs of students? Do you have a great program for students with disabilities, or do you have translators? Do you have paraprofessionals? What do you have? Do you have cultural situations where you're able to celebrate culture and diversity on your campus? What have you been able to do? And then what are some goals that you might want to implement? Do you have various? I was at a school where it was, a high Hispanic population, and it was beautiful, beautiful people. It was beautiful. Students from various countries, Cuba, Venezuela, Honduras, everywhere. It's beautiful. I loved it. And we were intentional at making sure that we promoted and celebrated their culture. It was 85% Hispanic learners, right? So we made sure that, students would have like a salsa day. They'd be able to come and dance and do different dances, salsa, merengue, and all these other things, and really celebrate. We allowed them to listen to, music that they loved listening to. We had translators, we had paraprofessionals, we had everyone on campus to really intentionally meet the needs of these students. We allowed them to celebrate the beautiful countries they came from and their beautiful heritage, because they had to have that sense of belonging. We were intentional about that. And so I want you to take a moment and think about your class makeup, your district makeup. What are the demographics that you're dealing with? Your school makeup. How have you served and serviced each demographic? And how have you respected them and made them unique and individual in a way, not of, oh, I'm going to isolate you, but in a way of, I'm going to make sure that we celebrate you. Whether it's during the year in a specific month, or, we, meet with you guys, and we used to have this where we used to have a student group made up of students of various culture groups. And we had those students to offer us suggestions for like PBIS activities. What do you guys want to do in this month? What do you want to do in that month? So the student, I'm talking about high school, like we had student body, like presidents and, from each grade level, things like that would meet. You could do this in middle school too. And they would tell what the students wanted and what various culture groups wanted. And we made it happen. So, definitely implementing and increasing student voice in this as you're implementing these things, so that you're not just putting something out here and hoping it works. When you have the students at work with this, it's going to create a buy-in. And then, of course, teachers are going to want to support those students. So, of course, you can offer it as an opportunity for teachers to really kind of take students under their wing and to help you guys to implement those strategies. So let's continue. Dr. Dre continues. He's talking about the difference between diversity and inclusion. He says that diversity is the mixture of individuals in society, while inclusion is allowing that mixture to exist and work well together. And so what does equity and inclusion mean? It is a rights-based approach. It's when you reach out to people who are excluded and marginalized by improving access to them, you adjust efforts to provide access while considering racial demographics. Okay. And then they're talking about like how, different percentages, as far as, and Dr. Clyburn spoke on this, the percentage of student enrollment, Caucasian students enrollment went from 61% to 44% by the year 2029 in public schools, because there has been an increase in diverse learner makeup. So Another interesting statistical fact is that currently, well, the number of teachers who are of European descent range from about 80, last I heard was even all the way up to 89% across the United States. But the student demographics of diverse students is at least 70% in our nation. So unfortunately, there has been a divide. There's a cultural breach. There's a cultural gap that is affecting relationship building and social interactions between teachers and students. And the way that you're able to really bridge that together is by knowing your students and taking a risk through cross-cultural communication, interhumanism, and equitable practices in the classroom. And so Dr. Dre speaks here about equity. There's an equity illustration here, and it's the different spectrum. So I think that this is very interesting. How equity you'll see, or equality, everyone has a stool of equal sizes. But then in equity, they give students what they need to be successful. And each student has unique needs. Now, Dr. Dre and I did have a conversation about if you look at the one on the left, the photo on the left, the man that is standing there in like the orangish looking slacks, it doesn't really look like he has anything. And honestly, it looks like they took away from him to give to the one on the right. That is not equity, right? You don't want to take from one so that another one will be successful. That is not equity. That is actually an inequitable practice. For instance, if a student is gifted, you don't want to take from them their opportunities or resources that they're using, like they have a calculator or whatnot. You don't want to take their resources and say, oh, you know enough, so I'm going to give it to this student who is underserved, who is behind a grade level. No, you don't do that. That is inequitable practices. But what you do instead is you provide each student what they need. So Dr. Dre and we spoke about this. So if this is really like this diagram on the left, if this really was equitable, that student still should have had a stool. And matter of fact, not only a stool, he should have had whatever he needed to be successful. And on top of that, we spoke about how it goes from not just equality to equity, but that when you're really doing the work, it promotes students to liberation. That is the true goal of all leaders, is to get students to a place of liberation so that there are no barriers, not even this fence that is holding all of them up. Here's another example here on the right, the student with disabilities. They were able to provide a ramp for that student so that they can get the reports that receive the support that they need as well. And so Dr. Dre is continuing. He says that true equity, it does not require taking from one to provide for another, and it allows for success of all students. It takes into account the assets and the variabilities of all individuals. And the thing I like about this is, you'll see equality on the left. Some of them, they just can't even reach that fruit, right? Everybody has everything. It doesn't mean that they're going to reach. And, yes, sometimes it's low hanging fruit for some of your students, maybe your tier 1 students, they got it. But what about those tier 3 students that you need the MTSS RTI supports for? And so that's when equity comes in hand, and you have to figure out how can you infuse instruction and maybe do various pull in, push out groups or push in, pull out groups so that these students can thrive and get the accommodations they need as you're trying to accelerate learning and give them the supports that they need to be successful in the class. Now, Dr. Kwashanda is amazing. She is a math coach, but now she's actually a professor in Texas doing a phenomenal job at the University of North Texas. And she spoke about equity for the math coach. And if anybody knows about equity at the math coach level, it's definitely Dr. Kwashanda. So she spoke about how there's social justice in mathematics. If you look at page 77, take a moment and look at page 77. She speaks about how the Association of Mathematics Teachers, Educators, they defined equity as access to high quality learning experiences, inclusion for all learners, mathematics educators, and respectful and fair engagement with others. Okay. Then she talks about why did she, embark upon coaching. So she says, well, one, stop professional development is not going to be enough. And she speaks about how coaching, it's basically peers who teach other peers. I think this is imperative because whenever a teacher is in the classroom and they're overwhelmed, they're just overwhelmed with the paperwork, overwhelmed with all of the discipline, overwhelmed with the curriculum, and they don't know how to be successful. It is it is so refreshing to walk into another teacher's classroom during a learning walk, or to work with a math coach who's going to come in and observe, not in a gotcha state, but really try to come in and facilitate and to scaffold and to help them. It is such a refreshing feeling when you know that you have somebody that is really advocating for you as the educator, and really helping you. So Dr. Kwashana is going to speak about how math coaching can be effective as an equitable practice, for all educators. So she speaks about how when the structure of coaching, when you're doing this, it should be content specific and individualized. And that's when the equity is starting to fill in here on page 81. She mentions how Kraft et al. In their study, they had a meta-analysis across 43 states to conclude that there is a positive effect on coaches and teachers' instructional delivery. Dr. Kwashana mentions how what constitutes a quality coaching program is the ability to aid teachers in their development in classroom culture, curriculum, instruction, and assessment on page 82. So take a moment and think about what have you been able to do to provide a coach, or maybe a department head or someone that can coach beginning teachers, to coach teachers that are burned out, teachers that are new to teaching that specific topic. What have you been able to do? Feel free to put it in the chat. Feel free to talk among yourselves, and move forward as you're working through this. So now we're coming back together, and I hope that you've been able to, share, whether it's through chat, through conversation with your leaders, different coaching things that you've been able to do, different strategies. We're going to continue to talk about math coaching and other imperative parts of Dr. Kwashanda's chapter here. And she spoke about attending to equity and social justice. And she says that Gutierrez's work, and from 2012's Dimensions of Equity, they spoke about 4 equity dimensions: access, achievement, identity, and power. Again, 4 dimensions of equity: access, achievement, identity, and power. And that is why equity is not just racially charged. Like, it's not just a racial approach, but there's so much. I mean, that's why, yes, you have students of various diverse backgrounds, but you also have students with disabilities, students of various linguistic backgrounds, students of various mental situations, and social, emotional situations. Equity hits on all of those different things. And so Dr. Kwashana says coaches should ask teachers how to plan to attend, or to plan to attend to these dimensions when planning lessons. How powerful would that be if coaches were able to help teachers to really develop like a skeletal approach of instructional delivery around the lens of access, achievement, identity, and power for all of their lessons in the classroom? She spoke about how when you're dealing with access, they should focus on technology, participation in the class that's given, and standardized tests and the math pipeline. Further, when you're dealing with identity, that's concerns with the balance between self and others. So students, they should see themselves in the curriculum. And that's what's really going to strengthen identity. When there's a sense of representation in the math textbook and the word problems throughout the book, and also in the teacher or the educators that are teaching the students. This is imperative. And this is why representation does matter in the classroom. And then she spoke about teaching in a socially just manner. How do you do that? Dr. Kwashana talks about utilizing pedagogical strategies to ensure equitable access to course content. Dr. Kwashana continued, and she said that you should consider student backgrounds, cultural perspectives, traditions, and knowledge. Dr. Kwashana also thought it was imperative to teach about and for social justice, to articulate reasons or issues regarding social inequalities, and to consider the culturally relevant pedagogy that helps students to recognize various social issues that exist. And then, of course, she came up with a framework that is for holistic educational coaching that attends to equity and social justice. And so this is hers in her dissertation. And of course, she has her information on the slide so that you can connect with her as well if you're wanting her to come in to do some specific coaching with your leaders. She talks about how there's advocacy. How will you be an advocate for your students? How will you advocate for yourself? Then it goes to justice, equality, and social justice. How will you attend to equity and social justice in the classroom? Community builders. How you build community amongst students and teachers and administrations and other personnel. Standards and the content. How well do you know the content? And how will you improve your content knowledge? Then looking at curriculum resources. What curriculum, is going to be there to teach the students? And then, and I would say definitely looking at the curriculum, how is it connected to the students and their culture? Does it really make them feel like they belong? And then teaching strategy, tech tools. She says, what strategies will you use to teach the content and curriculum? And then the last step of the holistic educational coaching approach is management tools. How you document accommodations, grades, parent, teacher contact, and etc. This is great. And even in the management tools, you can even add on there, how will you, document these things regarding, any disciplinary situations? How are you doing that in a socially just manner to make sure that you're setting students up to win? So now that's going to let us transition into Dr. Alyssa Foss, who, she is speaking from a personal experience of now, she's a district leader, but she's speaking as, just a teacher's lesson in equity. And so she says that no matter how hard a student tried, it didn't matter because she got the message that she wasn't good enough for math. So take a moment and think about that. How many students come to the table already feeling defeated, feeling like, I can't do math? How many students are going to walk into that Algebra 1 class, that intensive class this year, angry at the teacher before the teacher even introduces themselves? How many students are going to act out behavior-wise because they know that math is a place of anxiety, a place of fear. And so in order to cover up that fear, they're acting out those first days of school. So with that said, Dr. Alyssa is going to share her experience. She said that she came from Maine, so she didn't have a lot of diverse experiences. She had to deal with her various biases. So how do we become comfortable when approached with the elephants in the room, like race and etc.? She spoke about some students. So she spoke about Deshaun and how he was a teacher helper and he would help her dismantle fights. So not a teacher helper in a sense of, he's going to erase the board or he's going to whatever. He's going to help me with my behavior issues because I don't know how to deal with it. And I'm just kind of like at arm's length and they can figure that out. Deshaun help, right? How many teachers are probably can honestly say, yeah, unfortunately I've done that too. She also goes on and she talks about Trey, how he had an expectation not to act up for the students who wanted to learn. So she's talking about these various biases, and think about that. Think about being Trey, and the whole thing is you can't act out because student A wants to learn. So the message that it's giving the student is you don't want to learn. And we assume that you don't want to learn, but we've not taken the time to look into, what various accommodations you might need, or, do you have various things in place? Do you have an IEP? Like, what do you have in place for us to really speak to your specific situation to set you up for success? All students deserve, a fair, appropriate, and public education. So what can we do instead of jumping to conclusions that students don't want to learn because they're acting out? What can we do to really establish a relationship with that child and to break past any biases and any barriers that might exist so that we can help set that child up for success instead of making them feel like the assumption of they don't want to learn is a true reality. And so Let's keep going. So she spoke here. She says, how can teachers build or change this type of environment through equitable practices? What supports could they put in place? And I want you to take a moment and think about that, and just, whether you have time to put it in the chat or not, what can you do to change these things where the troubled kids or the students that are acting out, they're used as your buffers to manage behavior. They're told, oh, be quiet so that student B can learn. Or, students are told to believe that they're bad, so then they act out because everybody said that they're bad. How can we undo these things? Feel free to, either speak out or write it in the chat. And you can also follow up as well. And so she goes on to talk about inequitable practices on page 103. So she says that ability grouping, her experience, it was a self-contained class of 32 sixth graders. It's a lot of students, right? ESL and IEPs are involved. And so she says, how do you provide an equitable or an environment to diverse learners in an equitable fashion? Some of the inequitable practices she said she experienced were ability grouping, standardized testing, and teaching to the test, which anybody in education, you have been under that pressure, I'm sure. And that is more elaborated on page 106 if you want to refer to that. So Dr. Alyssa says, why did I pride myself in being the caring, loving, empathetic teacher that I thought I was, when in reality, I was perpetuating inequitable practices and allowing my biases to inform my instruction rather than my students? That was a mouthful, and a very powerful mouthful. But the thing I love about Dr. Alyssa's approach is that she was very real and very honest, but she did something about it. And so sometimes we all have to have a moment of introspection and reflection where we say, am I really a good teacher? And I had to do this as an administrator. When I first came on board as administrator, I thought I had no biases. I thought I was wonderful. And I took the Harvard's implicit aptitude test, where they measure your biases. And I was shocked because it said I had a bias. And unfortunately, it showed in my suspensions. And I had to intentionally say, okay, India, why are you suspending these particular students, this particular gender? What is it? And I had to challenge myself. And then every time a referral would come to me, I had to double take instead of being like, oh, yep, 2 days. Yeah, I had to slow down and I had to reflect. And what helped me is I kept a journal and I would write, okay, today, such and such happened. Before, this is how I dealt with it, but this is how I've improved. And this is where I'm striving to be down the road. And I held myself accountable and I reflected. I wasn't hard on myself to the point that I was like, oh, India, you're just a lost cause. But I reflected on the progress that I was making. I celebrated those successes, and then I continued to have consistency and to implement those effective practices with fidelity. And so take a moment to think about how can you do the same as an educational leader. So let's keep going. So here, she spoke about how can she, allow her unchecked biases to inform instruction on page 107. Really good read. And then, of course, that leads to Dr. Adrian Anthony. He speaks about what is equitable leadership and what does it look like in an educational setting. So he's talking to us as a principal. So what if all students and the adults that supported them received the individualized supports and scaffolds necessary to feel a sense of belonging at school, to achieve high levels, and to take control of their own outcomes? He talks about how it's imperative to raise the bar for performing students and to eliminate racial predictability. See clear method, which starts on page 114. Now, this is a pretty where they go through every single letter, and it's a part of a big framework strategy for educators. So again, it's a big framework strategy for educators. So I would highly recommend that you go through this. It starts on page 114. If you focus on the letters E and A in this, in pages 118 and 119, you'll see. So just take a moment and look at those with me. So, if you focus on the E, In the A. So the E, it says expect pushback, challenges, and barriers. The concept of equity does not come naturally to everyone. I would further assert that equity in action challenges everyone to push beyond their comfort zone. Moreover, it has not been a part of our foundation. It's taken sacrifices of many great men and women to enact change to local, state, national, and global policy. So he's going on to talk about how, it's going to take action and to have equity advocacy. He's going on and talking about, so take a moment to read that. He says to be patient with staff as they grasp the concept of equity, utilize pre-planning to embed equity into professional development, and take notes on themes that staff seem to struggle with around equitable policies. And then the letter A, actively hire based on equitable metrics. So, he talks about centering your hiring process around equitable hiring practices to develop an organization that promotes, retains, and promotes staff with value equity. So you're promoting everyone with value equity, developing interview questions that begin with a general question about themselves, but continue to have a scenario questions that discuss equity scenarios. Okay. So you're trying to also recruit diverse talent. There's so much here. He says to hire and retain staff that promote equity for all students. During your interviews, have scenario questions focused on equitable outcomes. So next time you have a lineup and you might say, oh, well, we don't know if we have that much diversity or we don't get that many applicants. Well, then see, how can you work with maybe the local colleges? Do you have like a historically Black college or university that would be willing to give you some of their undergraduates, to have them come in and try out a round of interviews and seeing if they can, maybe be a good fit on your campus? Or maybe you can talk to some local businesses to see if somebody is trying to transition into education. There's so many different things that you can do to really promote equitable hiring and retaining of leaders in the education space. So this is phenomenal advice from Dr. Anthony. And then, of course, the Honorable Susan Valdez, she talks about equity for legislation. There's intentional policies and procedures. So equity, according to the National Society of or the National School Board Association, it says that students have the access to resources that they need at the right moment in their education, regardless of their race, gender, sexual orientation, disability, ethnicity, language, religion, or family background. She says that you have to understand the difference between equity and equality on page 130. Then she talked about budget conversations. How do you advocate strongly for inequities that exist in a district that are uncomfortable but have to be exposed publicly? So on page 132, she talks about how there's disparities in faculty, access to programs, curriculum, and assessing the culture or climate to schools. So it's imperative that we have conversations about how we can really allocate budgets to fit the needs of all students in the district. Then she goes on to talk about addressing faculty disparities. Teachers did not assemble student population. Some faculty were not culturally astute. On page 132, she says, before someone can teach another, we must have a relationship with them. She goes on to say that developing an empathetic ear as a teacher is key, because this brings awareness. And when you do this, you can bring awareness to issues that are taking place in the district to boardrooms. This is how you advocate at a legislation level. She talks about how some of the results that existed or that came about it, you can have dual language programs. You can consider school data when you're making decisions. Further, on page 135, she says you can understand how to best elevate a school by understanding all of its components that make up the school culture, all of the components. She says that parents and community leaders must wrap their arms around children and speak to them about the realities that exist. So in conclusion, we have to consider definitions of equity and understand the difference between equity and equality. Further, use school data to consider how to implement equitable practices and efforts to build a school culture built on trust and empathy, and then reach out to communities and have all stakeholders involved. So with that said, thank you so much. I would love to connect with you. You can reach me at india.white.123@gmail.com if you're interested in speaking, professional development, books, and merchandise. My Twitter is Indie Speak and Teach. LinkedIn is the India White, and my website is www.india-white.com. I have some QR codes you can scan. So let's keep ourselves connected. And thanks so much for your time here. Wish you guys a wonderful, wonderful day. And Thank you so much for connecting with me. Any questions? Please also feel free to email me any questions that would arise. india.white.123@gmail.com as a follow-up. And yes, I can give you the link to this presentation so that you can show it to your leaders. And my team and I are definitely willing to meet up with you for more professional development, panel discussions, and more. Have a wonderful day, and we will speak next time.